Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy that so many of you could join us for the third edition of the Strong Brain Institute's Resilience Presentation Series. In a moment, I'll introduce our speakers. But in that moment, I would like for us to pause and recognize that even while all of us are working in our spaces to prevent and mitigate the negative impacts of trauma, we are at the same time witness to an incredible and unimaginable wave of trauma being cast upon the people of Ukraine, even as we speak. It's very easy for us to criticize our federal and state governments, but we should recognize that at least for now, those criticisms are protected by the privilege of never having to worry about being invaded by a foreign power. For that, I am personally grateful. But not being invaded is not enough. We still have plenty of work to do inside the US and inside our respective states. In Tennessee, that work is being championed by our speakers today, who are the hearts and minds and the driving engines of Tennessee's mission to promote the prosperity and well-being of its citizens through the Building Strong Brains Tennessee initiative. Richard Kennedy was appointed to be the executive director of the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth in June of 2018. In fact, he has spent his entire professional career working with and advocating for children and youth. Prior to joining state government, Richard worked with the Davidson County Community Services Agency, Camelot, Hermitage Hall, and the Greater New Orleans Area Council of the Boy Scouts of America. Richard is a native of Middle Tennessee and holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science and a Master of Arts degree in Counseling. Melissa McGhee is the Children's Mental Health Advocacy Director with the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth. She works with statewide partners and advocates in a number of state systems to support healthy physical and mental health development for children and families. Melissa is a professional counselor and has worked with adolescents and their families as a counselor and case manager. I'm so sorry that our excellent work is clouded by world affairs, but the takeaway is that we keep plugging along to make the world a better place, one small step at a time. So Richard and Melissa, help us take that next step.
Great, Wally, thank you so very much for the introduction, and to all of the participants, thank you so very much for the opportunity to be with you today. I know Melissa is going to share her screen, and we will work from that for the PowerPoint presentation. But as Wally was making introductions, I was kind of scanning through the list of attendees. And so in a lot of ways, it kind of feels like a family reunion, and that I am so glad to see so many folks that we know, that we have the opportunity to work with, and really just so many incredible partners that have contributed greatly to the Building Strong Brains Tennessee strategy and work. Many of whom are much more qualified to actually do this presentation than I. So for those of you that's who you are, thank you for that. See several alumni of the Commission on Children and Youth who are joining us as well, who really worked so hard to create the foundation of this work in Tennessee, and not only with alumni of the commission, but other folks from other departments that have moved to other opportunities and or had the privilege to retire. So as Wally said, my name is Richard Kennedy, and I have the great privilege to serve as the Executive Director of the Commission on Children and Youth. And the Commission on Children and Youth, many of you know, we are part of the executive branch of Tennessee state government, and we are an independent agency in that we are governed by a 21-member board of commission members. For those of you who are in Northeast Tennessee, you are represented on the commission by Judge Sharon Green, who just does a stellar job of keeping issues that are relevant in Northeast Tennessee front and center in the conversation. But what I hope that we can accomplish today during our time is we want to spend some time with you kind of refreshing your memory about the Building Strong Brains Tennessee strategy, kind of how we got to where we started the work and what some of the work has been. Then we kind of want to switch gears a little bit to talk about how we are envisioning this work going forward, or opportunities to envision this work going forward. And then third, really want Melissa to do a deep dive into, when we talk about a resilient Tennessee, what do we mean by that? What does that look like for us? So Melissa, if we can move to the next slide. So I want to spend a little bit of time, as I said, just kind of reminding you guys where we started, kind of where we've been driving towards. So next slide, Melissa. Want to kind of remind you all that about 5 years ago, there were a lot of cyclones of activity that were happening in the state of Tennessee around using the adverse childhood experiences, research and data, a lot of conversation around strategies to use that research and data to improve outcomes for children, youth, and families. And then honestly, there was a lot of conversation around building resilience, building trauma-informed communities, and the like. So I always want to start my presentation or this presentation by acknowledging what was happening, that kind of predecessor activity. So in East Tennessee, our dear friend and hero, Becky Haas, was leading a lot of work with the Johnson City Police Department. And so was really leading that conversation in those communities in Northeast Tennessee. In Southeast Tennessee, there was some really interesting work that was happening with an organization that was called Discover Together Grundy, that was really a partnership with the Grundy County schools, as well as the University of the South at Swanee, and a partnership with the Yale Child Study Center with Dr. Linda Mays. Moving across the state to the west, there was some really interesting and passionate work that was happening specifically in Nashville around the creation of a collective impact organization model strategy that was known as ACE Nashville. For their purpose, they use the ACE acronym stands for All Children Excel. And so they were doing some really interesting work in bringing together organizations across the city. And then in West Tennessee, there was a really interesting group of folks that were coming together, and they were saying, we know there's something here with this research and with this data, and we really want to do something in Memphis, but we're not exactly sure what we're going to do. So I will tell you that in Memphis was really kind of the seed of the work that led to the state effort. And that one of the accomplishments that the group of folks working in Memphis did is they made the decision that they wanted to replicate the ACEs survey in Memphis. And they really wanted to look at how are citizens in Memphis Shelby County faring with adverse childhood experiences compared to folks who were in the original survey that was conducted by Kaiser Permanente. So I don't want to say as you would imagine, but I will say as you would imagine, what the folks in Memphis found was that the people who had participated in their survey really had higher numbers of adverse childhood experiences than the original group. So once they had this information, they decided that what was really important was to share this information. And so they had invited former Governor Haslam and former First Lady Chrissy Haslam to come down for kind of a half-day summit, kind of a media event that they were doing to release this information. So former Governor Haslam, former First Lady Haslam could not attend that particular summit. So in their stead, they sent Jim Henry, who at the time was the commissioner of the Department of Children's Services. So as commissioner at that time, Commissioner Henry heard this information, he said that he was driving back to Nashville and he just kept thinking about what he had heard and realized that we as a state cannot afford to lose another generation of young people. We just can't do it for the future prosperity of the state, for the economic success for the state, and quite honestly, because it was the right thing to do to put strategies in place to be sure that we did not do that. So when the Commissioner Henry got back to Nashville, he met with Governor Haslam and First Lady Haslam, shared what he learned, and then really made the decision that from the governor's office, they were going to do a one-day summit. And that one-day summit was going to be based on bringing in national speakers and others to do a deep dive into the ACEs research and the survey, the outcomes of that. Really invited other national speakers to talk about the science of brain development, the science of communication, and really to plant that seed to start what became a groundswell strategy. with the folks that were in the room on that day. It was a very targeted invitation list. There were leaders from state government. There were leaders from the judiciary. There were leaders from the foundation community, the business community, other private sector organizations and foundations. So at the end of that day, the deputy or the then commissioner, he became the deputy governor. So that's why I stumble over my words there. But at the end of that summit, he really did issue a charge. And the charge was, we are going to change the culture in Tennessee. And we are going to do that by using this information and this knowledge. And this work is going to be led by a state coordinating team. And that coordinating team is going to be balanced by a private sector and public sector steering group. So to date, that is really how we began that work and really how it's been structured since. Melissa, would you go to the next slide for me? So when we talk about the Building Strong Brains Tennessee strategy, the mission is pretty simple. And so as I said, the then Commissioner Henry, then became Deputy Governor Henry, really kind of helped flesh this out. So the mission of the Building Strong Brains Tennessee strategy is to work to change the culture of Tennessee so that the state's overarching philosophy, policies, programs, and practices for children, youth, and young adults utilize the latest brain science to prevent and mitigate the impact of adverse childhood experiences. So, as I said, the mission is pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but the strategies to get there are anything but simple and easy. Melissa, will you do the next slide for me? So, when we talk about the Building Strong Brains Tennessee strategy, there are several goals. And so I really don't want to insult your intelligence by reading each of those goals to you when you can see them before you. But one of the things that are a couple of those that I do want to highlight is just the very first one. That this work, we really want to increase the potential that every child born in Tennessee has the opportunity to lead a healthy, productive life. And so I think that that's something that we all agree that whoever we talk with, that's what we want for all of our children. I think that the other really important strategy with this is the goal of the strategy is really to look at ways that we as a collective children's advocacy community can impact public policy in Tennessee to really support the prevention of ACEs. But even more importantly, I would say with this is to reduce the community conditions that contribute to them. We realize very quickly that state government serves a very specific purpose. And so we know that state government, in a lot of ways, I kind of think about it like folks that work at the airport. I think that, and with air traffic controllers, that we can do a really good job of helping planes get off of the ground. And then when it comes time, kind of help the planes land. But I really, truly believe that the magic of this work and where the greatest progress that has happened has really been in the communities across the state. And we'll talk more about that as we go through the presentation. But you see all of those goals that are in front of you, and they're all equally important, but those are the two or the couple that I really wanted to highlight for you. Melissa, thank you so much. So when this work really began, there was this I don't want to say infographic, but this image that was created to kind of visualize the work that we're hoping to accomplish. And so for those of you that have been around the work, you've heard us talk about the 4 Ps and transforming the 4 Ps, and you will see those in those center circles. So really what we're trying to do is we're trying to change philosophy and approach, policies and funding, programs and services, and professional practice, and align the work that's happening within each of those areas, really kind of under an umbrella of being trauma informed and working towards building a more resilient Tennessee. The arrows that are on the outside of the image, you will see they're really different disciplines or kind of affinity groups. And so really with that, you will see how there's a role for every one of those groups to impact the work that is happening. One of the alumni of the Commission on Children and Youth is a lady named Jen Drake Croft, who did a great amount of work for us in this space. And one of the things that Jen often said, that every time I heard her say this, it always just kind of stuck with me. And what she said is, I can have a conversation with anyone, and I can learn what that person is passionate about, and I can show them how adverse childhood experiences really impacts their passion area and their area of focus. And I so believe that to be true. Next slide, Melissa. So when this work happened, there were a couple of things that we who were working within the state realized. And one is we realized that we had to be certain that communities and citizens across the state were really, their awareness was being raised around this topic, around this subject, around these issues in a way that we were kind of all getting there together. That state government couldn't get too far ahead of the communities, or that the communities with the state had to keep up with the work that was happening within those communities. So it became really important for us to really have a consistent message, a public awareness kind of strategy with this work. So a couple of things happened as we began this work. So one of the first really successes of this work, I would say, is that the members of the General Assembly realized the importance of this work, not only in theory, but really in practice as well. And so the General Assembly invested initially $1.25 million to be given to the Department of Children's Services, to then be granted out in small but high impact grants to communities or organizations across the state, to really try some new ideas, new strategies, to see kind of what was working and where there would be impact or change when there was a very specific focus on these issues. Towards the end of the Haslam administration, the General Assembly increased that funding to $2.45 million and made those dollars recurring. And so that was a huge success, kind of an unexpected investment into the work that was happening. So it allowed for more dollars to be granted to communities and organizations to begin try some new initiatives, new strategies, new efforts to address this area. Now, as with any organization, state government was not exempt from some of the initial concerns and challenges about what the impact of COVID would be on state revenues and on resources that the state had. So at that time, when the pandemic first hit, all state agencies were asked to do a 12% reduction plan. And so the Department of Children's Services looked at the Building Strong Brains Innovation Grant dollars, and I'm very appreciative that they continued to see the value in these dollars, and only recommended a small reduction from that. So that reduction, because of COVID, reduced the dollars from $2.45 million. They reduced it $555,000. So I'm not a math person, but so I think that's leaving the department around $1.9 million that's being granted out. The other thing that was really important was for us to kind of have some baseline data. So we needed to know, what do Tennesseans know about adverse childhood experiences? What do Tennesseans know about resilience? And so we were very fortunate to have some resources to be able to work with UT Swartz to do a public awareness survey. So we have been fortunate that that public awareness survey was completed 2 times. First time was just to get the baseline data, and then a second time was to really see what kind of progress we were making. I would like to tell you that when we did the second survey, that every person in Tennessee knew about this. It wasn't the case, but we did have some gain in knowledge with that. I think that what was interesting for me with the takeaway from that survey was really what communities had a larger increase in the awareness, and there was really the largest increase in citizens who identify as African American. And then I thought what was really interesting as well was when people were asked the question how they came to learn about adverse childhood experiences or trauma. That was at the time that the federal government had instituted the child separation policy for immigrant children crossing the border. So I thought those two pieces were really interesting data that came out of that. But with the public awareness, Melissa, you want to go ahead and go to the next slide? If you'll back up for me. So one of the things that should have been a bullet point on this, oh, it is, and I skipped over it. So in the very first, the state funding, one of the things that was very critical for us was to develop a training for trainers model. So as I said earlier, we realized that we had to use consistent messaging across the state to be able to build support for this work and to help raise awareness. So with the innovation dollars, the Commission on Children and Youth received a small amount of those dollars to really develop, and I hate to say develop, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but for right now, I'm going to say develop a training for trainers curriculum, and then really deploy that across the state. So when we started the thoughts around this training for trainers model, we thought, well, gosh, there has to be things out there that we can, that are already developed that we can just buy and use. And we quickly realized two different things. So we quickly realized what's out there was kind of expensive and we really couldn't afford that. And then some of the things that were out there were really targeted towards different, I don't want to say populations, but targeted towards very specific groups. And so through the work of the staff of the Commission on Children and Youth and many partners that are on this call today, and then as well as kind of an unofficial think tank advisory group, we were really able to curate a lot of the existing information to develop a model that works for Tennessee, that messages those areas that are really relevant to the work that we're doing. So we have been very fortunate to train over 1,000 individuals across the state to serve as trainers, and those 1,000 trainers have in turn presented information to over 80,000 Tennesseans. So that is one of the things that I'm the most excited about and proud about with this work. Melissa, next slide. So as we continued this strategy, and really started raising awareness, really started using the Commission's regional coordinators to help with some of the knowledge mobilization work, really solid partnerships with foundations and service providers and other nonprofit communities. Tennessee quickly kind of started rising to receive a lot of national and international attention about the work that we were doing. So a couple of those that I would like to highlight for you is that we were very fortunate that former Deputy Governor Jim Henry received an invitation from Casey Family Programs to bring a group of people to New York to spend 2 half days with then Mayor de Blasio's team to really talk about the strategies, lessons learned, and kind of seeds of the work in Tennessee so that they could look at ways that they could replicate some of the work in the city. The second really kind of recognition is that a lot of this work really that we are doing in Tennessee was not original thought. So we were very fortunate to have different organizations just share everything they had with us. And so one of those organizations is the Palix Foundation. And the Palix Foundation is in Canada, and they are really the funder and the director of the foundation. It really serves as the patron for the Alberta Family Wellness Council. And so through work with Palix, they again just made everything that they have available to us and are increasingly including us in conversation as they have new ideas, new strategies, new learning opportunities, so that we can contribute what we have learned, what we've accomplished, as well as learning from the work that they are doing in Canada as well. One of the architects of the Building Strong Brains Tennessee work is a lady named Mary Rolando. Many of you know Mary, and Mary worked throughout state government, but really kind of wrapped up her state service working within the Department of Children's Services. And so when Mary left the Department of Children's Services, she didn't lose her passion for this work and began doing some consulting work with the National Governors Association and really working with other states who are focused on this area as well, and provided a great amount of technical assistance to them. one of the outcomes of that partnership with the National Governors Association is that the NGA did a case study of Building Strong Brains Tennessee. And I think Melissa will put that link in the chat box for you guys so you can see that as well. And then when I say that we are receiving international recognition for this work, in some ways that feels so incredibly arrogant to say, but it really is the truth. And so we were contacted by representatives from the Trauma Awareness Network of Australia, who are based in Tasmania, Australia. And so spent a great amount of time with them, very much kind of paying forward all of the information that the Alberta Family Wellness Council shared with us to be able to share with them so that they could further the work that they were doing. An ask that they had of us was, could we have your training for trainers curriculum? And of course, our answer was absolutely, you can. And then the next ask was, will you take us through a virtual training for trainers? And so folks on the commission staff led those friends in Australia through that virtually. It was interesting with the time difference. I think it was like 8 o'clock our time or 7 o'clock our time at night, and it was like 5 o'clock their time in the morning. But Melissa and others really did an excellent job in developing that relationship, and look forward to the point where we're going to be able to learn from them as well. Next slide, Melissa. So yeah. Next slide, Melissa. There you go. So thank you so much. So so that's kind of how we've gotten to where we are. So I'd like to kind of talk about kind of where we are envisioning going from here and what that could look like. Some of what I'm going to tell you is really kind of hopes and plans. Some of it may be a little more set in stone, but I would say as we're re-envisioning or thinking about how we can build on the foundation of the work that's happened, this is one of those areas where we're going to rely very heavily on all of you who are on this call to help inform the decisions and the direction that we go forward. So next slide, Melissa. So as I mentioned, the way that the structure is in place right now, there's a Building Strong Brains Tennessee coordinating team. There is a public sector, private sector steering group, state child serving departments, partner organizations, other folks have done such an incredible job of really thinking about how they can align their work to really kind of, I don't want to say fit under this umbrella, but really how all of this BSB strategy really is kind of a skeleton for organizing kind of goals and strategies. And then with this, it's really important for us to continue to increase the presence of trauma-informed systems in communities. So next slide, Melissa. So let's go back to the last slide for a second. And so with this, kind of the vision that I have, and I know that we are still fleshing out, is that I think we are at a point with the Building Strong Brains Tennessee work where I used the example earlier of us doing a very good job of helping planes take off. And so I think we're at a point where we've done a really good job with getting this plane in the air. And so I think that the next iteration is really thinking about how can we help support communities, organizations, community, however we define that, whether it's a city, whether it's a county, whether it's a cluster of counties, whether it's a school system or a youth justice system. How can we really provide supports to help those folks who live in those communities or work within those organizations have the support, whether the support is technical assistance, whether the support is access to information, whether the support is a space to bring folks who are doing similar work together to really be able to learn from each other, to be able to impact their communities and organizations in ways that make the most sense for their particular parts of the state or their work. You know, I often say I have the great fortune to travel across the state and talk with folks from all across the state. But at the end of the day, I live in Nashville and I work for Tennessee state government. And I would never even pretend to walk into a community to be able to say, you know, community A, this is everything you need to do to address the issues in your communities. Because the people who live in those communities know their strengths, they know their opportunities, they know their resources, and they have just years of history of networking and working together to be able to solve problems at that point. So my timer has gone off, so I know that I am at my point. But before I pass off to Melissa, and I guess we can go ahead and go to the next slide, Melissa. What I do want to say is that the next step for this, obviously, is the goal of building a more resilient Tennessee. So Melissa's going to talk about what that looks like, what that can look like, and really where we see the future of this work going. But before we do that, I do want to share a little bit of kind of information that really kind of helped organize these thoughts in my brain. So I know many of you on this call are members of the regional councils on children and youth, and many of you know your regional coordinators in your regions throughout the state. But a couple of weeks ago, the commission's regional coordinators in Memphis hosted an annual legislative event. And so they did this event virtually. And as they were organizing this event, one of the things that they said was that they thought it was really important to do a panel that was focused on Blue Oval City. And so I know many of you are familiar with that, and I don't want to insult your intelligence too much, but Blue Oval City is really the working name for the new Ford plant, the new battery production facilities that are going into what we know as the mega site that is in Haywood County in West Tennessee. And so this is going to be a huge investment in resources. It's going to be a huge investment in that part of the state. And I truly believe that's going to transform that part of the state for the rest of my life and for generations to come. But initially, when they started talking about wanting to do this panel, kind of in my head, I was thinking, well, this is interesting, but is this really our lane? Is this what we need to be talking about? And so they were persistent and moved forward with that. And I will tell you, it was a fascinating presentation, just of all that had gone into recruiting Ford to Tennessee, the speed at which it happened, the investments and the groundwork that had happened before to create the mega site, and really lots of conversation about the potential impact of this investment in Tennessee. But there was a gentleman that was on the panel that was from Memphis. And one of the things that he said has stuck with me and really resonated, and I really think is in a lot of ways kind of the synthesis of this work that we're doing, and really kind of helps us think about a roadmap going forward. And his comment was, we can invest billions of dollars in infrastructure, we can invest millions of dollars in recruiting and in tax incentives and all of the things that we need to be able to actually build this facility, to be able to build the communities where the people who are going to work in these jobs are going to live. But at the end of the day, what we have to focus on is we have to be certain that we are building livable communities. And so just because jobs are there, that's an incredible opportunity. It's incredibly important. But I think for those of us who work in this world, I think there's a real, in this world being the child serving world, the community focused world, the resilient communities world, that really is, I think, our charge of how do we amplify our messages for those resilient communities, those built infrastructures, those things that we know improve outcomes for children and youth and families. And how do we message in that in a way that it really walks alongside the messaging of the economic and community development, the labor workforce message, and the like. So my hope is that in the next couple of slides, Melissa's going to really be able to talk to you about what a resilient Tennessee looks like, and really how that aligns with the thought of interacting with the business community and using that comment to focus on those livable communities go hand in hand. So Melissa.
Thanks, Richard, and thanks to ETSU Strong Brain Institute for letting us join you guys today. When Dr. Dixon and Dr. Mosier reached out about us doing this, I was wondering, because they probably know Richard and I can talk about this forever. And so that's why we set alarms and timers to make sure we're staying on track. But we are just passionate. I think most of you know, if you're familiar with us, we're passionate about this work and about moving it into the right places as we move forward, and us being a statewide community in engaging in this work. So when we think about building a more resilient Tennessee, gosh, there's so many things that can look like, right? So many different ways we can do that, so many different places we can move into, so many different opportunities. And so I think Richard mentioned this toward the beginning of his conversation, in that this is a process and we're still learning. Many of you know that I have been at the commission for quite a few years now, which is crazy to think about. But I have historically been overseen the Council on Children's Mental Health. And then, as Richard mentioned, our alumni, Jen Drake-Croft, who is awesome, and I will be forever indebted to her for the work that she has done for us, has moved on to the next exciting place for her in her career journey. And I have moved into a space where I get to now oversee the Building Strong Brains work, which comes at a good time in a lot of ways, because we're transitioning as a state. At one point, I can remember Dr. Dixon sharing with us the fact that we want to reflect on all the good things that have been done. And much like Richard highlighted, there's so much work that was going on across our state that even allowed us to step into this space and be part of this work from a state government perspective. And so thinking about the work that we've done, the spaces that we've been in, the training that specifically TCCY has gathered and curated, I guess is a good word, and how do we take that and move it into a place where we're supporting even more and more resiliency across our state, because we know that's going to look different for everyone. Not everyone has boots with straps or even boots. So we want to make sure we can address that we can take this message into our communities, that they can become, just like Richard said, livable spaces for everyone, livable communities where they can thrive and flourish, and everyone has buy-in for the next generation. And speaking of the next generation, let me get on to the next slide. This will sound very familiar if you are used to our Building Strong Brains work, because this is what we call our, this is a statement at the beginning of what we refer to as our core story. If you were with us back in 2015 at the original kind of kickoff summit where Deputy Governor Henry kind of gave us our charge, then you probably received a shiny piece of paper with this on it. But it starts out with the fact that the future prosperity of any society depends on its ability to foster the health and well-being of the next generation. When Tennessee invests wisely in our children and our families, the next generation will pay that back through a lifetime of productivity and responsible citizenship. And those 2 pages just go on to further support that need. Excuse me. So when we think about that, when we think about how we have gotten to the space that we are, and what do we do next? Where do we move to next? How do we move the work that we have, continue to move it to more trauma responsive, trauma informed, and resilient spaces, and community engagement in that effort? So I wanted just to remind us of this. We also had a summit, I think it was in 2018, where Don Schwartz from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation joined us, and he reminded us of things like this. Nearly 1/5 of all Americans live in neighborhoods that make it hard to be healthy, to have overall health. And so that number is really astonishing when you think about, 1 in 20 kids. And so we want to make sure that we're supporting in Tennessee the resiliency that they need. One of the, this is a lot to look at, I understand, but what this is this is from what is called, it reflects an area deprivation index. So what it shows us is the least socioeconomically disadvantaged all the way to the most. And as you can see in the scale, the darker red it gets, that's where we see the most socioeconomically disadvantaged citizens in Tennessee as of 2019. So this was the most recent data that they had. And so when we think about having livable communities and prosperous communities and resilient communities, we don't want there to be any red. But we can see that the least disadvantages are kind of clustered around some of our larger urban areas, while our rural areas really see more disadvantage socioeconomically. And we want to be part of the solution that shifts our whole state into more of a blue shade. We also, this is from the Opportunity Atlas, and it is a poverty index. And so this was created with the Census Bureau. They partnered with Harvard and Brown universities and kind of looked at poverty. So this is the percent, and I don't know if you can see it up there at the top, very top right, there's a very small scale. This is the percent of children when they grow into adulthood that would live in under the federal poverty level. The black outline that you see here is I had put in, I believe, Davidson County. So what you see is a little bit of an outline of the middle Tennessee area. But you can kind of take a gander and look there and see that Tennessee is skewing toward the red end of that scale as well, which means that that's a greater number of people living below the federal poverty level, which I believe for a family of 4 is around $26,500 a year. Now you can go to the Opportunity Atlas and it's an interactive map, and you can pick your county and you can see what percentage lives below that federal poverty guideline. The darkest red in this map means that 32% or greater do live below that federal poverty guideline level. So when we think about, again, those livable communities, we want to have access to resources, things in Building Strong Brains that we call charging stations for our kids, for our families, for our communities that allow this livable community, this resiliency to happen across our state. So also, we're going to do a little refresher courses for those of you who do know Building Strong Brains. When we think about ACEs, we talk a lot about the original ACEs, those things that you see here in this diagram that live above the surface. And so these are the adversities that are experienced by kids, could be experienced by the children in our state. When we think about things that lead to that, that's where you see how environment can also affect this, how environment can really lead to these experiences that our children may come into. Things like poverty, discrimination, disruptions in their community, the lack of opportunity, including the ability to move around because of finances or social capital, the level of housing and not having quality housing availability, and then just the presence of violence in their communities can lead to some of these experiences. These experiences our kids have are rooted in community, in the environments in which they're developing. And so we want to, kind of help broaden our understanding of that, so that when we talk to our communities, when we go out to continue to build our communities, we want people to understand a little bit better that even some of these ways that those things are expressed through public housing, through the opportunity to engage in ongoing education, whether or not there's lead prevention services out there. Is there access to employment services? What's the job market? How do they get to their jobs? Do they have access to transportation? Things like that really are how this plays out in our community. They're the roots. So when we start talking and sharing and building resiliency in our communities, we want to cover the gamut. We want to talk to, be with, present to, have conversation with anybody that'll listen, right? Because there's so much here in the roots of adversity that can be addressed by the spectrum of folks. It doesn't just have to be people like myself who work with children and families, or historically have worked with children and families and now work on a more macro type level. So that's what we're talking about. I'm going to give you a little bit of a refresher about resilience too, if you've been in Building Strong Brains, that we want to remember to come at it from a space of where is our child starting at, because kids respond very differently, to different events, different experiences. And so while one child having an adverse childhood experience might need just a little bit of support, another child might need a whole lot. And so when we think about that, when we think about what that looks like, we really want to focus on where their starting place is. Where's their fulcrum, this little triangle piece that you see here in the middle? Not everybody starts in the exact center of the level. And so while it may take, one service to help a child in a family in one situation, it may take 3 or 4 to help another child or family. But we want to tip that positive side so far over to what that child and that family needs that it takes the negatives never really can overcome those positives. And so that is why we really, focus on resilience. We believe that that's important because we really want to shift that fulcrum to where it gets to that point where that negative piece can't overcome the positives, that we've so much support and community engagement, because we know kids do better when they're in their communities with their families. So we just want to continue to support that as best we can through our community engagement. Many of you are aware of Dr. Christina Bethel out of Johns Hopkins. And she's really just a genius when it comes to resilience and the work that she's doing. And I love this quote. It's kind of a little motivator for myself around the science of ACEs and the science of resilience. And so what she says is the science of ACEs and resilience shines a light on the importance of the moment-by-moment relational experiences of children to their healthy brain, body, and socio-emotional development, not only of our children, but of our entire population. The science requires a paradigm shift in how we think about child development, human health, social problems, and the skills and requirements for our own well-being, which we can learn. And so that reminds us that it's not just about parents, it's not just about social services workers, it's not just about teachers, it's about the librarian that works in the community. It's about the guy who mans the desk at the community center fitness room. It's about all the folks that come in contact with our kids and our families and how we shift that. Not to shift it off of us or not to place an extraordinary amount of responsibility on us. It's our part to do what we can to help build our next generation in Tennessee, right? And then Dr. Bethel, has really done good work around what is called positive childhood experiences and how they buffer adversity and they promote better adult health. So there's 7 that she's identified, and I'm going to read them for you. I have them kind of to my right, so my apologies for not looking directly at you. But what it shows us is that the positive childhood experiences really lead to better mental health outcomes, better relationships as those children move into adulthood. And so these are things like feeling free to speak with their family about their feelings, feeling that they have family support during difficult times, the presence of at least 2 non-parent adults who took genuine interest in them, that they felt safe and protected by an adult in their home, that they felt supported by friends, that they felt a sense of belonging when they were in high school, and that they participated in their community. And so the graph or the infographic that you see here shows that kids who've gone into adulthood with 6 or 7 positive childhood experiences versus 0 to 2 have 72% lower odds of having depression or poor mental health when they're compared to those 0 to 2 folks. So how cool is that? How exciting is that when we start thinking about resiliency? And those 7 things that I read, I'm thinking, yeah, every kid should have that. I hate the word should, but deserves that, is entitled to those things. And sometimes it just isn't happening. So how do we start moving the needle towards that? Even here, when you see kids with 6 or 7 positive childhood experiences versus those with 3 to 5, it shows that 6 to 7 have a 50% lower odds of depression. So even as, that moves up for kids in their positive experiences, it still makes a difference. And so that's what we want to really build on in Tennessee as we move forward, because these positive childhood experiences really just, help our kids. We foster nurturance in them. We begin to build a society-wide caring capacity, which I love those words. I'm going to find some way to use those every day. That when we build that society-wide caring capacity, when we engage in evidence-based programs, when we create policies based on evidence, then we're going to continue to increase our family resilience, the connection they have with their children, and how our kids continue to develop into healthy, well adults. So how do we get there? There was an entire what's the word I'm looking for? Edition of, I think, the American Academy of Pediatrics journal that looked at this very topic. And one of the articles kind of identified two things. This first one was to invest in multi-sector community networks to facilitate the development of our infrastructure, of our partnerships, of our capacity to support this collective engagement and collective collaboration. It's a lot of words to say. We got to work together. We got to work together across disciplines to continue to build and move forward this work in our state. And then we've got to align policies. We've got to align legislation with what brain science research is telling us, because that's important too. And so part of our reasoning behind building the Building Strong Brains training for trainers was to help align the conversation across the state, so that when a legislator in Mountain City and a legislator in Millington were at the legislature together, and they were going, somebody came in my office and was talking about the building of a brain is like the building of a house. You got to have a strong foundation. They're like, yeah, me too. So just remember, that seems kind of probably really elementary to those of us who have been in this work, but just a reminder that that's what we want to do. And we're going to get there through things like sustained coordination, leadership, infrastructure, communication, just all of those things happening together. And so what it might look like for us, for our work in Tennessee, for the strategy that is Building Strong Brains is, we're going to reimagine what our collective group of trainers across the state. I think Richard mentioned that we've trained over 1,000 people to talk about this across our state. How do we better support them? How do we engage them in more ongoing work so that it doesn't feel like we've given you this information, now, go forth and prosper. We want to continue to be the connectivity, the networking, the support that is needed for that. We're going to help support and establish and support affinity groups statewide. So those of you who work in higher ed, let's get a higher ed affinity group together. Let's get a faith-based affinity group together, because we know that the work that you're doing matters for other folks across our state. As TCCY, I hope to be able to continue an ongoing review and update of the materials that we use and how we train them. I also hope to establish and plan to establish ongoing opportunities for refreshers and question and answer sessions for our trainers, increased opportunities to engage in training for trainers, because right now our capacity is just not the most exciting. You win me pretty much. And so I'm hoping to find ways for us to increase those opportunities to train people to talk about this. We are reaching out and targeting certain sectors for our training for trainers in hopes that they'll continue to move this through their sectors. And then this is last on my list, but probably biggest in my heart, right? Is how do we and what do we do to further support our community engagement, our education around this topic, and the mobilization of your people in your communities? Our regional coordinators are rock stars. I love them. I could not do the work I do without them across the state. If you do not know our regional coordinators, we will hook you up. You just let me know. But they're wonderful, and they help us know their communities like we could never know. So hopefully I'll be better at finding ways to continue to engage in that community local level piece. And so we're just moving from a state coordinated effort to more of a state supported effort as we kind of give the reins out and help engage. So Richard, anything else you would like to say?
Yeah, Melissa, thank you so much. And as always, you're a stellar presenter. So I hope everyone appreciated hearing your comments as much as I appreciate the reinforcement of hearing them as well. I think the key for the key takeaway for the closure with this is that as we do re-envision the Building Strong Brains Tennessee work and support and strategy, I think it's a bit of a moving away from a state coordinated effort to a state supported effort. And so again, I do very much believe that communities and folks who are working in those communities across the state really have the answers, and it's our job to help provide that leadership, that structure, that space, that support that Melissa mentioned. As always, I have a huge ask, and the ask is, how can you help us? What are we missing? What support and services do you need? What would be helpful for you as you engage in this work ongoing? The last thing I would like to say is, I really do want to thank Dr. Dixon and folks at the Strong Brains Institute. I will always consider the Strong Brains Institute probably one of the highest accomplishments of the Building Strong Brains Tennessee work, and that this was built on a little bit of the foundation of that. But just know how much we appreciate them, their leadership, their work, and really moving from being a teacher to being taught by the student. So Dr. Dixon, thank you for organizing this. Thank you for the opportunity. And to everyone that's on the call, thank you for your time, and I hope we didn't bore you to tears.
Thank you so much. That was awesome, particularly to see where, to recap where we've been. I guess you've been, but I feel like I'm part of it, kind of, and also where you're going in the future. I was at the public sector meeting that Melissa was referencing, and my takeaway from that meeting was, well, what are we going to do now? And I was like, well, look back at what you've done, because you've been doing a lot of stuff for 8 years. And it's impressive, and maybe work from that. And so your idea of affinity groups is pretty exciting, particularly in higher ed. As a person from the higher ed sector, I really look forward to the opportunity of working with other folks from higher ed in Tennessee. We did have, and Ben may be able to correct me, but I noticed 2 questions. One was, can we circulate the slides? And if so, then go ahead and send those to me or Ben, and then we can send them to the attendees. And the second question is it you referenced, Richard, Memphis data from the Memphis project or something early on, and somebody wondered if that data could be shared.
Yeah, Wally, I'm gonna have to get my hand. Dr. Dixon, I'm gonna have to get my hands on that. That was done a while back, and it may be living in a folder that we have, or I might be able to find a website link for that. But if participants can give me a little bit of time to do some homework and find that, I think we can do it and share it.
Okay. All right. Well, we are at time now, and I don't see any unanswered questions in the Q&A. So let me just take this time to thank you so much again for being part of us and for helping us along on our journey, and look forward to continue working with you. And hope the rain stops soon. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you so much.